Hello, I'm Dilek Tunan. You're watching A News. Let's see the headlines for the hour. Israeli strikes hit Yemen's capital in retaliation for earlier Houthi attacks. World leaders send messages of support on Ukraine's Independence Day. UK anti-migrant activists protest outside a hotel housing asylum seekers. Israeli airstrikes have hit the Yemeni capital Sana'a late Sunday, targeting energy infrastructure controlled by Iran-backed Houthi rebels. The strikes came just days after the Houthis claimed to have fired a missile toward Israel, escalating tensions in the region. The strikes killed 6 people and injured 86 in a final toll, a Houthi health ministry spokesperson said on X. The Israeli military said the targets included a military compound housing the presidential palace, 2 power plants and a fuel storage site. The strikes are the latest in over a year of direct attacks and counter-strikes between Israel and Houthi militants in Yemen, part of a spillover from the war in Gaza. Hundreds gathered in Tel Aviv demanding a deal to free hostages still held in Gaza. It comes as Israel calls up tens of thousands of reservists, despite a ceasefire proposal on the table.
Hundreds of protesters rallied outside Israel's military headquarters in Tel Aviv on Saturday night, calling for an end to the war and the release of hostages still held in Gaza. Families of those kidnapped joined activists holding up pictures of their loved ones, chanting and beating drums. Many accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of dragging out the conflict instead of striking a deal.
We are here to protest against the Israeli government and specifically about Benjamin Netanyahu sabotaging again and again a deal of releasing the hostages and bringing them back home. We want all the hostages back home. The ones that are dead to be buried as proper, and the one that are alive back to rehabilitation. We want them home, and we want them home now.
The demonstrations came just days after Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel would begin immediate negotiations with Hamas, telling soldiers in Gaza that plans to capture Gaza City and defeat the group were still moving forward.
We're demonstrating and trying to exert pressure on our government to abandon its plans to recapture Gaza for the 4th or 5th time and do a comprehensive deal that would release our hostage, and end this war. We believe this war has no merits. There's nothing that you can achieve now. We think the government should go to election and we should do an election soon and just get it over with.
On Wednesday, Israel's military called up 60,000 reservists, a sign the government is pressing ahead with a major operation. The mobilization is expected to take weeks, creating a narrow window for mediators to work on a new ceasefire proposal. That plan calls for a 60-day truce, the release of 10 surviving hostages and 18 bodies in exchange for around 200 long-serving Palestinian prisoners. Israel says about 50 hostages remain in Gaza, with only 20 of them still alive. As negotiations stall, the families of those still held captive say time is running out.
The UN has confirmed famine in Gaza for the first time in Middle Eastern history, with more than 500,000 people facing starvation under Israel's tightened blockade. Palestinian officials say more than 280 people, including children, have already died from hunger.
A humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is deepening. With food, fuel and aid sharply restricted, families are being pushed to the brink of starvation. Since March 2nd, when the first phase of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas ended, Israel has tightened its blockade on Gaza, sharply reducing the entry of food, fuel and humanitarian aid.
I want to get food for my children so I can feed them. Making a living is hard, as you can see. The crossings are closed. There's nothing we can do. The situation is difficult. The economic situation we're in is hard. I come here to feed my children. I come early in the morning to stand in line until noon.
Since the collapse of the ceasefire earlier this month, conditions have deteriorated. A new UN report confirms famine in Gaza, the first such declaration in the Middle East since the system was established more than 2 decades ago.
Be in no doubt that this is irrefutable testimony. It is a famine, the Gaza famine. It is a famine that we could have prevented if we had been allowed. Yet food stacks up at borders because of systematic obstruction by Israel. It is a famine within a few hundred meters of food.
Israel dismissed the findings as false and biased, saying the IPC had based its survey on partial data largely provided by Hamas, which did not take into account a recent influx of food. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the report was an outright lie. According to Palestinian health authorities, more than 280 people, including children, have already died from starvation and malnutrition. The UN warns that hundreds of thousands more remain at risk, with preventable deaths expected to rise unless access to aid is urgently restored.
As the Israeli military reportedly finalises details of a potential Gaza takeover, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich stated that such an offensive must include resettlement. Joining me now to discuss these latest developments is Maurice Hitch from the Jerusalem Centre for Security and Foreign Affairs. Maurice, welcome to the programme. Firstly, how concerned are you about reports that an Israeli strike on Nasser Hospital has killed at least 8 people, including journalists?
I am extremely obviously concerned about the fact that the terrorists in Gaza continue to use humanitarian facilities such as hospitals in which to hide both themselves, their weapons and their terrorist infrastructure. This is something which should be condemned widely around the world. But unfortunately, the silence of the international community to the abuse of these terrorists, of the hospitals, is really emboldening them, empowering them, and allowing them to return there over and over again.
Now, to what extent do Smotrich's remarks reflect the official direction of the Israeli government at this stage?
So I'd like to ask you a question. What do you think should happen in the Gaza Strip? The UN says that 92% of all of the residential buildings have been destroyed. There is no infrastructure. One UN report says that it'll take 15 years and $1.5 billion just to clear away the rubble. Another report says it'll take 13 years and another $1.5 billion in order to clear away the unexploded ordinances. What do we expect the Gazan people to do during this period? Given, let's just assume there's going to be this amazing, miraculous funding to do all of that. What do we expect them to do? Do we expect them to live in a demolition site where they can constantly explode even after the end of the war? Or do we allow the Gazans the right that is given to almost any people in any war situation to flee and seek refuge anywhere else? Why is Egypt not receiving any of the refugees? Why is France, Macron, why is he recognizing a state of Palestine but refusing to receive any Gazan refugees? Don't we want to give the Gazans a better life, a better future? Or do we want to keep using them and weaponizing them only against Israel, against their best interest?
That's a very good point. But if I'm empathizing as a Palestinian, if I'd want to leave the demolition site, if I was asked to leave, I would want to know that I'd be able to come back to my own land, just as any human being with a sense of belonging to a particular land and space would want to inhabit once again. So would there be that option? Would Gazans be able to return if they were to peacefully leave as a refugee and go to any of the surrounding countries, like you mentioned, Egypt perhaps?
That has always been the discussion, that their evacuation would be a temporary evacuation to distance them from the fighting, distance them from the war, and allow Gaza to be rebuilt and reestablished as a flourishing economic and economic zone and prosperous area, rather than building terror tunnels below ground. You could build up and turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East once it is free from the dictatorial rule of these genocidal terrorists. And I'm sure all of the peace-loving Gazans will then flock back to Gaza to enjoy the prosperity.
Okay, and the IDF's Chief of Staff Eyal Zami warns of heightened risks to hostages. So if an incursion proceeds, is this the primary obstacle to implementation?
Without question, we are constantly fearful of the fact that the genocidal terrorists who kidnapped 250 people on October 7 and continue to hold 50 of them will murder the hostages that they're holding. We've already seen their despicable use of our hostages, of Eviatar David, showing him emaciated, starved, digging his own grave. These are people who have lost any type of semblance of humanity. And yes, when they realize that the IDF is closing in on him, there is a chance that they will resort again to the murder of the hostages. They've done it before. They will possibly do it again. We hope for the best, obviously, but we cannot continue in this situation. But let it be clear. The reason they are in danger is because they are in the hands of genocidal terrorists and not because of the impending operation of the IDF.
And on the one hand, Smotrich claims this is not a full-scale operation. So what might this tell us about the internal government divisions on Gaza?
Well, I think what Minister Smotrich is looking for as part of the more, I think, fringe elements of the government is a much more conclusive and much more decisive military operation all throughout Gaza and with more and greater immediacy. What we're seeing now is the start of an operation which will first and foremost deal with the Hamas stronghold in the Gaza city, what's left of it, and then thereafter only move on to the other areas of the Gaza Strip that the IDF hasn't yet operated in, particularly the camps, the refugee camps of the central Gaza Strip. So what Minister Smotrich seems to be advocating for is a wider operation which will bring about the freeing of all of the hostages with the greatest of expediency rather than going site by site in a limited operation.
And Maurice, with the major West Bank settlement expansion also approved, is Israel approaching full de jure sovereignty over both Gaza and the West Bank, or is it really going to be a case of rebuilding and re-establishing, as you said earlier, of the land for the Palestinians to return to?
So there isn't really an equivalence between Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip has been run for the last 20 years by a genocidal terrorist organization that carried out the October 7 massacre. They need to be defeated. They need to be eliminated. Gaza needs to be rebuilt as part of an international effort in which the Gazan population undergoes serious and very, very deep denazification. And then we can hopefully live peacefully side by side. Judea and Samaria is an entirely different story. There we have the terrorists of the Palestinian Authority also embittering the lives of the Palestinians, stealing millions of dollars of aid, ciphering them off into their own coffers. And something there also needs to be done, or else we will see the same return to an October 7 massacre again, and the necessity to carry out larger military operations in Judea and Samaria. So something needs to change there as well. I'm not exactly sure at the moment which direction the government is going in, but I think it should start with admitting the failure of the Oslo Accords and immediately acting to dismantle the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, so Maurice, I just want to ask you very directly, to your mind, from your analysis of the situation, this is not about a full occupation of Palestine on Israel's part. Is that correct? Am I clear there?
Without question, I think it's very, very clear from Israel's actions all the way along. On the morning at 6:28 in the morning of the 7th of October 2023, Israel was happy, quiet, enjoying our festival, enjoying our Sabbath. This war was started by Hamas. They started the war, not us. They started by murdering, butchering, beheading, raping. This wasn't something that Israel initiated. Israel was happy with the situation, moving forward, negotiating. Obviously, we'd seen just in the beginning of 2023 a series of very, very serious terrorist attacks that claimed the lives of almost 30 people. And so obviously that terror element was always there, coming out of Judea and Samaria, the rocket fire coming out of Gaza, and so that element of terror was always there, and it needs to be dealt with. But this isn't something that Israel initiated, and that must be remembered at every single step of the way.
Okay, Maurice, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now to Eastern Europe, where Ukraine marked its Independence Day with strong international backing as leaders from across the world reaffirmed their support. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg joined the celebrations.
Ukraine marks the 34th anniversary of its independence. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky led Independence Day ceremony in Kyiv's Maidan Square on Sunday, observing a moment of silence for those lost in the ongoing war with Russia.
And every day we're returning more and more of this war to where it came from, into the Russian sky and onto the Russian land. And with every step of this war there, with pressure on Russia, with their real losses, we know that peace for Ukraine is getting closer.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg joined the celebrations. Zelensky called Carney's first visit as Prime Minister on Ukraine's most important national holiday a big honour. Carney reaffirmed Canada's continued support for Ukraine and stressed the need for stronger deterrence against Russia amid talks on Western security guarantees. World leaders, including US President Donald Trump, King Charles III, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Pope Leo, French President Emmanuel Macron, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Chinese President Xi Jinping and the others extended congratulations and expressed solidarity through letters and social media messages. In Kyiv, Zelensky also attended a defence forum alongside Canadian Prime Minister Carney, where the focus was on expanding military cooperation with allied nations. The event showcased Ukraine's advancements in weapons and defence equipment production and was attended by senior officials from Denmark, Sweden, Britain and the Baltic states. Marking Carney's visit, Ukraine and Canada signed a landmark agreement on joint defence production. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal and Canadian Defence Minister David McGuinty signed the document in the presence of Zelensky and Carney. The agreement, accompanied by Canada's announcement of a military aid package worth more than $700 million, aims to boost bilateral defence and industrial cooperation, expand production capacities in both countries, and ensure greater stability in defence supplies. Beyond Kyiv, Ukraine's Independence Day was marked across Europe. Members of the Ukrainian diaspora gathered in Warsaw.
We don't have high hopes that everything will work out and there will be peace, because Putin is only waiting to gain time from Trump to take over more of our territories. I see what is happening in Kharkiv. They kill people every day, our children, and we cannot come back. There is no hope for peace.
In Paris, several hundred people marched through the city to call for Ukraine's sovereignty to be upheld in any future peace deal.
I cried a little bit this morning because I thought of all the losses and incredibly high price we're paying for this independence. But at the same time, I'm incredibly grateful that we have it.
The Eiffel Tower in Paris was illuminated in blue and yellow, the colours of Ukraine's flag, as onlookers draped in Ukrainian banners sang and photographed the landmark shimmering in solidarity.
Now, staying with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, both sides exchanged 146 prisoners of war on Sunday in a swap mediated by the United Arab Emirates. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, the freed Russian soldiers are now receiving medical and psychological support in Belarus. At the same time, Ukraine returned 8 Russian citizens from the Kursk region to Moscow. The exchange highlights ongoing diplomatic efforts between the two sides to secure the release of detainees. And now to Britain, where immigration tensions are spilling onto the streets. Anti-migrant protests flared again this weekend, this time outside a hotel in Epping, east of London. It follows a wave of demonstrations across the country, with the government now under pressure to reform the asylum system and reduce its reliance on costly hotels.
Anti-migrant protesters gathered outside the Bell Hotel in Epping on Sunday, waving British flags and holding placards. The hotel has become a flashpoint after a court ruling last week ordered the removal of asylum seekers from the site. The government plans to appeal the decision. The protest came just a day after police were forced to separate rival groups across several English cities, including Bristol, Liverpool, Newcastle and Hawley. Mounted officers were deployed in Bristol's Castle Park, while in Liverpool, 11 arrests were made for offences including assault and disorderly conduct. In Hawley, around 200 anti-immigration demonstrators clashed with roughly 50 counter-protesters from Stand Up to Racism. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Labour government has pledged to phase out hotel use and accelerate asylum decisions. On Sunday, ministers unveiled plans for a new fast-track appeals process, overseen by an independent panel of adjudicators. The aim is to reduce a backlog of more than 100,000 cases, including 51,000 appeals, where applicants are currently waiting over a year for a ruling. Local councils are also considering legal action similar to the case in Epping, while Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has vowed mass deportations if he comes to power. For now, immigration remains one of Britain's most divisive political issues, and one that continues to spill out onto the streets.
Moving to southern Europe, where hundreds of migrants were rescued off the Canary Islands on Sunday. Spanish Coast Guards brought 248 people, including a newborn baby, children and several women, safely to Arguineguín port on Gran Canaria. Some required medical attention after the journey. The Interior Ministry says migrant arrivals to the Canaries are down nearly 47% this year compared to 2024, when the route saw a record number of crossings. The Atlantic Passage from West Africa remains one of the most dangerous migration routes, with rough seas often overturning the fragile boats used by migrants. Now looking at Europe's economy, where foreign workers have become a key driver of Eurozone growth, helping to offset shorter working hours and falling real wages, European Central Bank. President Christine Lagarde said on Saturday at the US Federal Reserve's Jackson Hole Symposium, migrants made up just 9% of the Eurozone's workforce in 2022, but drove half of its growth in the past 3 years. Without them, Germany's GDP would be 6% lower, while Spain's post-pandemic recovery also relied on foreign labour. The EU's population hit a record 450.4 million last year as immigration offset falling birth rates, but the influx has fuelled support for far-right parties and tougher entry rules.
You are so good. You never get too close.
From Europe to North America now, where National Guard troops deployed to the US Capitol will now begin carrying firearms. The move follows President Donald Trump's declaration of a crime emergency earlier this month, which placed Washington's police under federal control and brought in nearly 2,000 Guard members. Officials say the weapons are for self-protection only and that the Guard is not making arrests, but focusing on protecting federal assets. Staying in the US now, where South Korea's president has arrived in Washington on Sunday ahead of his first summit with President Donald Trump. Lee Jae-myung's motorcade moved through Washington under heavy security ahead of his meeting with President Trump, where the two are set to discuss tariffs, defense spending, and finalize a trade deal cutting US tariffs on Korean goods. Now we look to North Korea, where leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the launch of newly developed air defense missiles to evaluate their combat readiness. The systems demonstrated rapid response against aerial threats, including drones and cruise missiles, according to the report. The test came a day before a planned summit between US President Donald Trump and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. Earlier this month, Kim announced joint US-South Korea military drills, accusing them of maintaining hostility toward Pyongyang and vowing to accelerate his country's nuclear program. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with his Egyptian counterpart Badr Abdulati on Monday in Jeddah, on the sidelines of an extraordinary meeting of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation Council of Foreign Ministers. The two discussed bilateral ties and regional developments as Fidan prepared to chair the OIC session addressing Israel's ongoing assault on Gaza, which has killed more than 62,600 Palestinians since October 2023. Turkey's First Lady Emine Erdogan has sent a letter to Melania Trump, the wife of US President Donald Trump. In her letter, she called for the same humanitarian concern shown for Ukraine to also be extended to the crisis in Gaza. Emine Erdogan noted that in Gaza, a child loses their life every 45 minutes and that the identities of thousands of children cannot even be determined. She described this as the most severe genocide of our time. The First Lady also urged Melania Trump to send a letter to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, stressing the importance of such a move. Emine Erdogan added that while it's already too late for thousands of children, there's still hope for more than 1 million children in Gaza who have survived. Turkey's largest warship, the amphibious assault ship TCG Anadolu, led a naval parade through the Istanbul Strait on Sunday as part of the Teknofest Blue Homeland event. After reaching Dolmabahce Palace, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan saluted the fleet. The event highlights Turkey's naval capabilities ahead of Teknofest Blue Homeland activities on the 30th of August and the 31st at the Istanbul Naval Shipyard, which will feature exhibitions, VR experiences, commando demonstrations, boat races, and ship design workshops. More than 2 weeks since the 8th August joint declaration in Washington, Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan's government is facing criticism at home for failing to publish the terms of the Trip Corridor project. Opposition figures such as Levon Zurabyan claim the government has ceded sovereignty and is concealing the agreement from the public. Joining us now is Dr. Melih Demirtas, political analyst, former diplomat and researcher at Cappadocia University. Doctor, thank you for joining the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Tuna, for having me.
Now, when might we expect the text of the US-Armenia MOU to be released or initial implementation steps taken?
Yes. Actually, this remarkable agreement between these two sides, important Caucasian powers, first of all, Azerbaijan and then Armenia, I think the two important powers now turning into an important cooperation and strategic friendship between each other. Of course, thanks to Mr. Trump and thanks to the United States, it starts to be much more faster than we expected. Because in the beginning of August, we have seen maybe such a development cannot happen so easily, so fastly, but it happens. And we've seen that the project is going on in a rapid sense. Of course, there are many opponents in the region, also in a maybe global or also in a regional sense. But the discussions in Armenia can be expected. This development is so fast because of this sovereignty discussions is also maybe more than expected. We can say that this agreement, maybe this memorandum of understanding between United States and Armenia cannot be opened because of this with every detail in a very near future. It cannot be opened. Maybe we can feel some articles, maybe some important opinions in this text can be publicized, can be given to the important authorities, official, diplomats and the statesmen, but all the details cannot be expected maybe in a very soon, projection, because we can see that in every internal opponent mechanism, in every important democracy, maybe consolidation structure, we can see such agreements can create its own opponent. Even for Armenia, even under the government of Pashinyan, who is an important figure actually in these last years, who really maybe favors this economic integration, who really favors these liberal openings for Armenia, but he cannot, of course, cannot skip every detail which coming from this maybe historical balances, from the historical balance of position of Armenian history, of Armenian community. So I think this memorandum of understanding will be kept not in secrecy, but much more maybe under professional observance for a while.
Okay, and Doctor, last week's groundbreaking ceremony for the 224-kilometre railway linking Turkey's Dilucu Gate with Nakhchivan and Kars, does this confirm trilateral coordination or some sort of understanding between Baku, Yerevan and Ankara?
Again, for this same reason, first of all, yes, we must expect that this is an important and historical, again, linkage and strategic friendship between two countries, first of all, Turkey and Azerbaijan. But the inclusion of this third party, which is Armenia, must be motivated, must be maybe energized with all this maybe inclusion of the actors. It could be, first of all, because United States, it could be Russia. Still, even these important wars going on due to Ukraine, still Russian maybe effect also can be felt in different senses, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, but also another important actor, China, from the Eastern projection. We can say that in every maybe manner, in every step, we can feel that Armenia will be closer to these projections. First of all, we can understand that Azerbaijani and Turkish connections and strategic lines will be developed maybe much more faster with this new memorandum, with this new spirit of friendship in Caucasia. But for the inclusion of Armenia, we must be much more patient, diplomatically patient, and we must be much more skillful. Both in the maybe Russian and both in the United States sectors, we can feel that the diplomats and these professionals must be included to maybe motivate all the Armenian sectors. Harsh line, this far rightist also. In every country we have such parties, in democratic countries, also in Armenia we have such far rightist or maybe conservative sections, but we must include all the sections to find a durable, maybe to find a much more stronger environment for peace and tranquility.
Regional cooperation is deepening in Central Asia as Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan set ambitious new economic targets. The two presidents have unveiled a roadmap aimed at tripling trade and expanding joint infrastructure projects.
Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan have agreed to boost their bilateral trade turnover to $3 billion within the next 5 years. Presidents Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and Sadir Japarov announced at a joint press conference in Bishkek on Friday. Tokayev said the goal builds on strong momentum, with trade reaching $1.7 billion last year and showing positive results in the first half of 2025. To achieve the target, the two sides signed a special roadmap and outlined several priority projects. Among them is the planned launch of an industrial trade and logistics complex on the Kazakh-Kyrgyz border next year, as well as the creation of a wholesale distribution centre for agricultural products in Kazakhstan's Almaty region. The leaders also stressed the importance of agriculture, which already accounts for 25% of trade, and agreed to enhance cooperation in infrastructure, including construction of a road from Almaty to Isikkul. Tokayev highlighted Kazakhstan's long-standing economic role in Kyrgyzstan, noting $1.4 billion in investments over the past 2 decades, including in socially significant projects. He further expressed Astana's support for Kyrgyzstan's bid for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council in 2027 to 2028. Japarov, for his part, welcomed the favourable political climate between the two neighbours, saying it provides a solid foundation for growing trade, attracting investment and strengthening cultural humanitarian ties.
Now, 30 young students from Azerbaijan achieved places at some of the world's leading universities as part of a BP Azerbaijan initiative. Some of those universities include Cambridge, Imperial College London and the National University of Singapore. The event was hosted on Friday, where students were handed certificates, and BP's Regional Vice President, Bakhtiar Aslanbeyli, congratulated them for their hard work. The event was made possible through the collaboration of BP Azerbaijan and Roof Academy, highlighting years of initiatives to nurture local talent, particularly students from low-income families. That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News for more updates.